Can't say that I'm surprised that these questions are being raised. It's, whether they're raised in a public or a private forum. We understood at the time that this was a problem. It wasn't the decision that the board made to retain him was not something that we came to quickly. We understand that this is a serious matter, and we took it seriously. So, ultimately, the board consulted on this. We put it in the context of his 14 years of service, and prior to that, his military service, obviously. So, I don't know that addressing it in public, changes the calculus.
Well, I'm just really going off of your statement that people who will behave differently if they are being watched all the time. And to me, it seems like this office that sits over in the O'Neill building, that the only time that we ever hear from it is when the office is coming after one of us. Okay.
Yeah.
And so let me switch over to Mr. Barnes here. Mr. Barnes, how important is it for the staff of the OCE be held to the same ethical standards as members of Congress and congressional staff?
It is important, and the board took this, as Paul said, the board took this very seriously. We suspended Mr. Ashmawi. We investigated the matter. We've been in touch regularly.
Now, the matter or the two matters?
Well, we investigated the earlier one. I'm talking about the most recent one, but we investigated the earlier one extensively, and we learned, by the way, that
which would have been the so-called barroom brawl?
In that case, the person who attacked him ended up suing Omar and the police chief of the town. And the police chief was saying that Omar's version of what happened there was the accurate version. He was attacked by some people while he was out with his wife on Valentine's Day. The board took it very seriously. Omar was suspended while we reviewed this matter, and I'll give our chairman, now chairman, then co-chairman, Mr. Vinovich, real credit for making sure, he was on top of this, making sure that whatever we did in the case of Mr. Ashmawi was consistent with the way this matter should be treated under House rules for employees of the House of Representatives if they are suffering from an illness like alcoholism and have an incident like this. How would they be treated? We didn't want him to be treated any better, but we certainly didn't want him to be, after his excellent service as chief counsel and staff director, and as after his distinguished service in the United States military, we didn't want him to be treated worse than your staff would be treated in a similar circumstance, Mr. Chairman. And the board unanimously agreed that after he'd been suspended for a period of time and an investigation was undertaken, and we made sure that all the hoops had been jumped through appropriately with respect to House rules, we decided to reinstate Mr. Ashmawi. And let me just add one other thing.
Well, let me do this, Mr. Barnes. I am way over my time, and I want to be respectful of the other members that are here because there's so many things going on. I'm going to yield now to Mrs. Torres for her questions. I recognize.
I wasn't going to stop you because I think you were going in the right direction, but thank you for yielding to me. Chairman Vinovich, would you say that the employees that work for this office are not the traditional federal workers?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you clarify the traditional, what sense?
Ethics. You have to abide by your own ethics, right?
Yes.
I see the position of your employees as one not of, it's just a job, it's just another employee. It's a lifestyle. When you sign on to do the work to judge other people's behavior, you have to be above all of that, which is very difficult. I'm having a tough time hearing an acknowledgement and hearing acceptance of some responsibility on your behalf, Director. And while I understand addictions, rampant addictions, whether it's alcohol or any other substance, it is an awful issue to have to deal with, and it takes a lot of stress on person, an individual, and the family and everyone involved. But you don't have the average job of a federal employee. Therefore, you don't get to simply say, I just made a mistake and move on. Chairman, I want to ask you some questions about the rules and policies that govern OCE staff. What is the process for setting standards of conduct for the staff beyond what is posted on the website, which is very difficult to find? So I want to encourage you to also revamp that website.
Okay, well, we do have the code of conduct. We have an employee manual that governs staff behavior and conduct. We obtained the manual from the House, basically.
Is that practice? Is that put in practice? Is there training? Is there, ongoing training on these conduct?
Well, the day-to-day operations of the office, the chairman and I, the board meets on a monthly basis to review complaints. So the way the process is set up, at each stage of the process, for a complaint to be, for an investigation to begin, for initiation, for second phase, for referral.
What are the policies that exist for disciplining your staff and ensuring a safe work environment?
The staff discipline, the board is ultimately responsible for hiring and staffing decisions. Typically, the staff director would be responsible for staff discipline. He's the day-to-day manager of the staff. In this case, obviously, he was himself the subject.
Did who notified you when the first incident occurred, the bar fight?
That happened in 2015. I began my service in 2019.
Do you know who notified the office?
I don't have any knowledge.
Who notified the office of the incident that occurred last year, of the traffic collision?
Mr. Asmawi called me and the co-chair.
Mr. Ashmawi, can you please describe which of the new House rules for this 118th Congress has impacted OCE and what the impact has been and might be in the future?
Yeah, ma'am. Of the rules that were established in this Congress, one was the reimposition of term limits. Another was a requirement that the board hire its current staff within 30 days. Of all of them, I would say the one that is of most concerning, merely from a logistical perspective, is that over the last 14, 15 years, really, even before my time, this was the first Congress in which the board was appointed in a timely fashion. So that 30-day provision really could legitimately result in the accidental termination of OC staff at the beginning of a Congress. And so it is our collective suggestion that 30 days either be removed or simply pinned to the time that the board is appointed. So the board has 30 days from appointment.
Okay.
And then the same result can...
I've exceeded my time. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. I'd ask unanimous consent of the committee to commit to the record a report that I have of the incident regarding the independent counsel report of the incident in Milford, Pennsylvania, without objection. Now recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Mr. Vinovich, I'd like to start by directing your attention to some procedural questions about the investigative process at the Office of Congressional Ethics. Specifically, let's start here. When a complaint is filed with the office, is that complaint forwarded to the respondent?
The subject of the complaint?
Correct.
We don't have communication with a subject unless and until we initiate an investigation. So if we initiate, you have to have 2 board members to initiate an investigation. And if that happens, then the subject is notified of that.
So during the period of time, so the answer to the question then is you do receive complaints that are not necessarily forwarded to the subject of the investigation. Is that right?
Yeah, as the co-chair mentioned, we receive 58,000 complaints. So I don't believe we communicate all those to the...
When an investigation is initiated, is it your practice to always provide the investigative materials that you have, including any inculpatory or exculpatory information, to the subject of the investigation?
At the initial phase?
Yes.
The initial notice is just to the effect that, the OCE has initiated an investigation of you, and we make a request for information from the subject.
When the House Ethics Committee decides to bring forward an investigative subcommittee, does the Office of Congressional Ethics necessarily stand down if you have an investigation ongoing about the same person or subject?
Under the rules, upon request of the Ethics Committee, if the Ethics Committee can send us a cease and refer notice asking us basically to conclude our investigation because they have one ongoing, and if that happens, then we would do that. Yes.
All right. And if the House Ethics Committee is already reviewing an allegation, does the Office of Congressional Ethics ever open an investigation as well in tandem to that already existing investigation?
Well, this kind of goes to the transparency issue. So the Ethics Committee could be doing an investigation unbeknownst to us or anyone else. So it is possible, yes, that the Ethics Committee could have an ongoing investigation and then we begin an investigation. Then it would...
If you are aware of an ongoing investigation by the Ethics Committee, would it be the practice of the Office of Congressional Ethics to also initiate a tandem investigation in some circumstances?
I can't think of an example of that during my tenure.
All right. I'd like to return Mr. Ashmawi to a line of questioning. The chairman was asking you some questions about some of your challenges during your tenure, and if I understood correctly, I believe one of your answers related to the extent that you had violated any ethical rules yourself during that time, it was inadvertent and not a purposeful thing. Is that correct?
If you're referring to the use of email after my assault, I thought I was within the bounds of the rules. It turns out I may not have been, and I accept responsibility for that.
Okay. So as we sit here today, you would acknowledge that some of that conduct by you during that time did, in fact, run afoul of some of the rules that would govern your conduct?
Certainly was determined. It was determined that way to be that way. Yes.
All right. Would you also agree, sir, that your function as your role in this process and in this committee is, in fact, to be the subject matter expert on what the rules of professional conduct are that govern things like that? Is that not the type of thing that you assess when it comes to people who are the target of these allegations that come before your committee?
It is part of my job.
Now, let me ask this question going back to you, Mr. Vinovich. Are you aware of any circumstances where OCE staff gave a report to the press before providing it to the subject of an investigation?
No, I'm not. Occasionally our reports will appear in the press. When that happens, I always contact Omar. This happened recently with respect to a subject. He released a very limited aspect of the complaint for his own purposes, but no, I'm not aware of any releases by us or our staff.
Now, in this circumstance where you have issues with staff misconduct, are those issues required to be raised to the board?
Yeah, I mean, the only one that has happened during my tenure is the one that's being discussed here today, and it got a lot of attention from the board. Whether it's required, I mean, it got attention.
My time has elapsed, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Now recognize Mr. Kilmer for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I spent the last 4 years chairing the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, and then now serve on the Subcommittee on Modernization that House Admin set up. And there's a couple of open recommendations from the Modernization Committee that I just wanted to run by you. They involve ethics rules and the ability of members to work for the public good. First, the Select Committee recommended that the House update and provide clear ethical guidelines to allow our offices to direct constituents to appropriate community organizations, resources, and services. So, you know, as members, we know our local food banks, for example, and nonprofits and employers. You get the idea. That was one recommendation out of the Select Committee. The other one was recommending that the House provide some flexibility within House Rule 24 to allow district offices to co-sponsor constituent service events with non-governmental organizations to provide information on other resources to constituents. So, for example, members want to be able to host job fairs or resource fairs. There's that flexibility under Senate rules, but not under House rules, and so one of our recommendations was to do that. The questions I have for you are more just interested in inviting your information and guidance. One, and I don't know who to direct this to, maybe Mr. Barnes because you served. Do you know, has OCE had to investigate instances of members breaking these kinds of ethics rules? And second, you know, I think there's interest by the Modernization Subcommittee to have ethics rules that make sense, that allow members to serve the public good to the best of their ability, but that don't unnecessarily prevent the sort of resource sharing and events that could benefit our constituents. And want to get your appetite for working with the Modernization Subcommittee in that regard.
Well, I'm aware of the work of the Modernization Subcommittee and think very highly of what you all are trying to do. Think to improve the operations of the House. I'm not aware of any cases that have come before us with respect to the issues you raised. I do have a couple of very quick recommendations for you all to consider with respect to OCE. One would be to give us, which we do not currently have, subpoena power, not over members of Congress. We're not trying to subpoena members of Congress, but third parties. For example, when we're investigating an allegation, we'll go to a company that may have evidence with respect to the allegation, and they say, well, we'd love to give it to you if you would subpoena us. So it'd be very helpful for OCE's investigations going forward in the future to have subpoena power over third parties, not over the subject of the investigation. The other one that I would mention, and this is sort of a real strong personal view on my part, when I was appointed initially, the rules for OC required concurrence by the appointing party, the speaker or the minority leader, with the nomination of the other. So when I was appointed by Speaker Pelosi, then Minority Leader John Boehner had to agree with my appointment. The rules were changed, so that's no longer the case. Now it's just concurrence. They have to notify the other that, it's just a notification now. It's no longer an agreement. I looked at my Wikipedia profile not too long ago, and I noticed that it said John Boehner had appointed me. Well, technically that's true, because back when I was appointed, both of them had to agree that this person should serve there. And I think, although the current board I don't think is any problem at all, I think just looking at the future, it's a better process for an organization like this that's totally nonpartisan, should be appointed in a way that's agreed by both parties.
I think one and I don't want to speak for the chair of the modernization subcommittee, but I think the members of the committee are interested in working with OCE and with the ethics committee to make sure that if we were to provide those sorts of flexibilities that I just mentioned, that we do it in a way that doesn't create problems, right? We want to have an ethical house. We also want members to be able to serve their constituents' needs and do things like have job fairs and things like that as our recommendation suggested. There's some other things that we looked at, and I think we'd invite your input on other rules that we ought to be thinking about. Things like, there are civic technology organizations that want to be able to provide their software and underlying code to Congress for its use to make the institution function better. We're limited in that regard. So I just raised that, and I know I'm out of time, so I'll yield back. Thanks.